remember. Online events bring the world together, and the replays just go on forever.
Hello everyone, welcome to the storytelling journey. My name's Americo, along with my friend Jay. We have an exciting conversation lined up for you today. We are streaming across LinkedIn, YouTube, and Substack. Today is a special episode. We have a special guest. Jay is shifting over and moving over to the guest chair. We've been talking about this for quite some time, and I think it is appropriate to end the year off featuring something that is important to Jay and important to myself, seeing how the two of us come from unique origins. And we'll talk about that in a second. We'll give Jay an opportunity to say hello. How you doing?
First of all, I didn't know the guest chair was this comfortable. You're skimping on me, man. Thank you. And when you were talking about this and you had the idea for me to sit in the guest chair, first of all, I'm appreciative of it. I'm humbled by it. I'm usually the other guy asking questions, but it's really about storytelling more than it is really about me. But you can't. I find that you can't take me out of the equation because there's no story when you take the storyteller out of it. I've always been we had a guest on here who talked about, the different types of verts, introverts, extroverts, and the new one I didn't know anything about. I've heard of omniverts, right? I can be an introvert. No, I take that back. I am an introvert for the most part, but I've become an extrovert because I love to just share stories and to share specifically stories about my culture as well. That's where really the passion comes from. And so if you don't know me, I'm the storytelling strategist on LinkedIn, and I wrote a book, and on the 19th, it'll be 1 year since it was published. So December 19th is the anniversary of the book that I published, which is The Rules of Engagement in Storytelling. Now, that's 10 easy rules that is a compass to help you communicate. That's really what it is. And, where all this came from, pretty much came from my upbringing on Guam. And so that's really why I think I can't just divest myself of the story itself, because it's intrinsic to the story. So
here's something fascinating, and you and I have been picking up on some nuances that bring us closer together each and every time. So your origins from the West Pacific, mine from the North Atlantic. We're two island boys. I was born in, I wouldn't say raised, but I was born in a small island of Terceira, the middle of the Atlantic, part of the Portuguese Empire, let's call it. Small island, no more than a couple hundred miles big. And Guam is marginally larger, but to think about our origins and where our origins have kind of been embedded and rooted in who we've become, it's fascinating to take it this next hour. And of course, we'll repurpose this content and continue to share this. But I am just humbled by how we've come together with completely different backgrounds, but so much similarity. It's so exciting. I'm being told we're having difficulties broadcasting on LinkedIn. Kind of take a look at that. We're still streaming live on YouTube as well as Substack. So we'll continue the conversation. I'll try to troubleshoot this in real time. But for those who are tuned in, if you have questions, drop them in the comments. We'd love to hear what you have to share, as we ourselves share a little bit about Jay and his roots with Guam and who he is today as a storyteller. So I did put up the QR code, and I'll bring it back up in a second. But as we go along and we're listening, share not only your comments, but if you find today's conversation enlightening, share it with your community. Give us a like, and if you like it enough to save it, we'll gladly accept that as well. Now, let's bring that QR code back up so that anyone who is struggling to come up with holiday gift ideas, or just a gift in general, a gift for yourself or a gift for someone else who can really benefit from the rules of engagement in storytelling. We'll leave the QR code up during the conversation, and feel free. It is, if I'm not mistaken, it'll default to the Amazon Canadian link. But if you're planning on purchasing this from the US, consider it a gift for me, because a Canadian currency saves you an extra maybe 40%.
That's cool.
All right, so let us dive in. I'm really, really anxious to hear your thoughts on some of the things I did a little bit of research and learned a lot in a short period of time about Guam, and I want to hear it from you directly. Now, Guam is often described as a place where generosity is a way of life. What does that mean, coming and having roots? Share a little bit of that with us.
Yeah, so I'll give you a prime example. You know, we talk about fiestas, right? So it's for a very long time, hundreds of years, right? The Spanish conquistadors, you know, just like the Portuguese, you know, they explored a lot, you know, very early on. And not unlike my ancestors, but they explored a lot to find the Spice Islands, and they found us, or we found them, depending on how you want to look at it. Anyway, because of that, there's the melding of multiple types of cultures have come together over these hundreds of years, and I'll share with you the fiesta, what it's like. You know, we have currently America as the colonial power on Guam, right? And so we know about McDonald's and all of that, but a fiesta is a celebration, right? A religious celebration usually. And fiesta, just, you know, if you think about it, it's the word feast in English, right? Fiesta. So we have fiestas in almost every village. Not every village, almost. We have 19 villages on a tiny island, and almost every one of them celebrates a fiesta. And a majority of the people in those villages celebrate, and they invite everyone else from the other villages to come and celebrate their patron saint, the saint that usually is attached to the church. What does that look like? An open bar with all kinds of drinks, adult and otherwise. We have usually a DJ or a band playing. And the food, the way I would describe the amount of food and the types of food is this. It's a fiesta. It's a Hawaiian luau. It's a Chinese buffet. It's like a golden corral all rolled into one. And that's not even a joke. That's the truth. If you've ever been to Guam, you'll know that we're famous for that. And how does that relate to this? If you see us put together this thing, there's a party before the party, and we invite everybody there too. Well, everybody who wants to help. And then after that, there's a takedown party because we got to put everything away and, do all that stuff, the cleanup, right? That's usually not fun. So we have to have another party to invite people back to help. So really, it's 3 days of partying. But if you've ever been to one, the generosity, I mean, the fact that we have an open bar, right? It seems crazy, let alone the amount of food that's free. We don't charge people to come to our fiestas. You come with an empty stomach, and you'll go away full and with, leftovers. Really, you can go home with leftovers. So that whole thing is really about generosity and faith and celebrating not only the patron saint, but community, the community built around this faith. So, yeah, that's generosity to me.
That's amazing. Now, did you grow up in Guam or?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I grew up on, I always said I was going to, I was an island boy, and I was going to hang my hat on that. I wasn't going to leave. My parents were actually living in Washington State for years before I even came out here with my wife now. But my wife, her sister lived in Alabama then, and she just had a baby, and she wanted our kids to know their cousin and vice versa. She wanted her niece to know what it's like to be around family from Guam. And so she said, "You want to come with?" So that's how I ended up here. But
Fantastic.
yeah, but that was in 2007.
So growing up around these values, and it sounds like, once again, a lot of similarities between you and I. Growing up around these values must have shaped the perspective and the relationships that you've built, and being part of community and building community. I know that means a lot to you, simply from the conversations we have and the events that, in addition to this one, the events that you participate in and giving back. How much of that was shaped from your upbringing?
A lot of it, almost all of it, if I be honest. When you're an indigenous storyteller, from a tiny island like Guam, really, I often talk about the impact that diverse cultures and traditions have on how stories are told and received. Growing up there, I was really in a vibrant culture where storytelling wasn't just entertainment. And I never really knew this until I was older, but it was a way of preserving history, transmitting values and, just like I was talking about, fostering like community. So if you just think about it, like the Chamorro elders I talk about in my book, right, passing down stories of like World War II or narratives of, resilience, stuff like that. Emotions in these settings, it wasn't subtle. And really they were the guiding light. It sounds corny, but it was the guiding light that really allowed me to see the path to connection and understanding. So it wasn't just about like reading a script from a podium. It was about living and breathing those stories, experiencing them as a collective. So yeah, it really impacted me. It really influenced me. I talk about the party before the party. We have a majority of Chamorro homes have outside kitchens so that you don't stink up the the house, right? With all the smells and the things that go on before the party, right? We have what's called like Letzen. Letzen is the pig. Usually it's not a baby pig, it's a sizable pig, and you roast it. So doing all of that, you need to be outside, and where there's a lot of people that you need to have space. And so in those types of environments and the kineticness and freneticness of what's going on, people are constantly talking and sharing stories and trying to pass the time, because sometimes a lot of that stuff is grueling work to prepare for a party that'll feed hundreds. I'm not joking, hundreds, right? There's a lot of times when you'll have 500 people at a fiesta at one house, constant, right? That's people in and out, but 500 constantly. And so, of course, the storytelling was crazy. I'd be the kid that sits where I'm not supposed to. Go over there. Why are you over here? You're not supposed to be listening to these stories. So that yeah. So definitely, that's where a lot of I heard a lot of the stories.
Well, let's pick up on that. Stories that you've heard that perhaps you weren't supposed to hear, but part of my research uncovered something that really connects my perception of who you are and how you've come to become who you are. I learned that Guam is rich in tradition, stories passed on from generations, and I know that you've referenced stories that are passed on from elders in the past and that previous conversations that we've been part of. Do you have a favorite legend or cultural story that has influenced you that you continue to share today with your family, your friends, and one that sticks out?
There's a couple of legends, and if and I always I like I don't like calling them legends, but that's what that's the vernacular that's being used. Um, it's these stories of myths that have been passed down from generation to generation. But if you listen intently and close enough, you'll find that there's a vein of truth, maybe an historical truth to the story, to the legend. And I'll give you one example. So the creation story, Fotna and Ponten, brother and sister, they created the earth and the people that inhabit the earth. Now, it sounds kind of strange from a Western standpoint, because you normally think of a couple, a man, right, or a male god and a female god, and that's where people come from. But and it's not incestuous. That's not the the story. It's so the male god basically laid down, and from him came the land, and his eyebrows were rainbows, his eyes were the sun and the moon, his back was the land. And so this is this is the story. He sacrificed himself to give the land to the children of Fauna, his sister. And from her, she sacrifices herself, and from her comes people to inhabit the land. And on the surface, that it sounds like a cool story. There's all kinds of things, but there's so much to unpack when you're from there that people don't know. Like the rock that was left, it was sort of like an effigy left after Faulkner gave birth to the people of the earth, human beings. So she remains there stoic as a rock, literally, and she's right at the coast. And if you go, and it's weird, because what happens is we realize that she is integral to society. We are a matrilineal society. The women hold just as much authority as the men. We even have women chiefs, as a matter of fact. And land is passed down through the woman, not the man. And her husband isn't the one who raises the children, because she remains part of her parents' clan. So her brother raises her son. And the woman, the girl, if she has a girl, is raised by her aunts, her sisters. So right away, there is where we see the connection between family, the importance of sisterhood and brotherhood, but you won't know that just by listening to the story of how people came to be, and how the island came to be formed. So you have to really understand the culture to see it. And that's why I share that story all the time, is there's a vein of truth in every single legend. And that's not just Chamorro people, that's people all across the globe. You will find that there's history embedded in those legends and those myths.
So Chamorro culture emphasizes respect and reciprocity, and I feel that energy when I speak to you, and I hear and listen to you, and I can feel your passion, your belief in your culture. So that really says something. How do these principles translate into today's brand engagement and where we are today? Everyone's kind of chasing this shiny object, when many times all you got to do is pause and remember what our elders and what our history has taught us.
Yeah, it goes back to that feeling of community. You're part of something, right? So respect and reciprocity. That's really a big thing in my culture. You know, we kiss the hand of the elders. Some of us still do. Um, and even the way we kiss, it's not like with our lips. It's sort of like the Maori, where they press noses against each other, and is the hongi, where they inhale, they breathe each other's essence. And so when a young person grabs the hand of an elder, they inhale their essence. So it's to pass, like, the fact that the elder is allowing this to happen is the allowance of their essence to pass on to the next generation. And so that's reciprocity, like on another level. But imagine that just being not just family, but friends. And so how does that translate? Well, if you come into my home, there's a thing we say, and it's a funny thing. You know, I go into my aunt's house and I say, "Hey, can I borrow back my lawnmower?" You know that phrase, "My home is your home," right? This is a literal thing. So when I go asking something like that, it's tongue in cheek, but it's usually the truth, because we're so giving. We allow our aunts, our uncles, our cousins to borrow the things that we would need normally to do what we need to do. And so this type of thing is normal, right? Like we'd have to go borrow back something that we loaned to our relatives. The other thing is, like, fish is a big thing, right? And so, but when we fish, it's not like, rod and reel. We're out there with nets. And so, sometimes we catch more, a lot more than just for a family. And we don't want any of that stuff to go to waste. So we invite extended family. Now in Guam, extended family is just family, just so you know. So taking those ideas and those concepts, right? Building an authentic community, that reciprocity, right? I have something that you may need, and you have something that I need, and we can share this together as a community. And that, to me, really goes back to my culture and my upbringing, and how that can generate business for people, because everybody talks about community. And I was making this statement, and people laugh at it. It's one of my dad jokes, but it's, when you're authentic and you're building a community, you want a city, an authentic city, authenticity. See, that's how I get people to remember that.
That's awesome. I'm going to pick up on Bill, who chimed in on the Substack feed. He wrote, "Don't chase, but attract." And that, when I read that, that translates and fits in so well with community. Community isn't about chasing virality. It's about attracting that essence of community, that essence of reciprocity. You talked and mentioned about how the elders are respected. Similarly, growing up, even people who did not have any bloodline or connection, everyone was family, and anyone who was an elder was to be addressed as an aunt or an uncle. And you would
Same.
respect them, right? Is that the same?
Same, absolutely. And we call people brother, we call people sister. My wife's family, she'll tell you all the time, her cousins are brothers and sisters. And it seems odd for people looking from the outside in, but really that is the genesis of how we build community. We build it from our families out. And you become part of this community. And when you do that, when we accept you, you're not just community, you're family now. And so building a brand is no different. It's, if you break it down to its simplest core, It's that reciprocity. It's that authentic connection between the person you're doing business with. Because nobody buys things based on, I mean, there are people out there who do, but a lot of people out there buy on emotion. And, you know, I'll tell you, I'll give you another example, right? If I'm buying something for Christmas, sometimes I'm reminded of my childhood when I'm buying this thing, a piece of something, product, a gift for somebody else. And because it made me feel good as a kid, I'm going to want to share that with somebody else. Right? We're in that season now, that gift giving season. So that's really a good example right now in this season, in this moment. People going out there buying gifts for Christmas. That emotion you feel when you're buying these gifts, where you're brought back to a time when you were opening up that gift on Christmas Day. Right. This is the thing. That's what I'm talking about. So sharing that emotion with someone, that really brings authenticity to the community, and that will draw in, attract, like he was saying, people to that community. Hey, what's going on over there? It looks like they're having a good time. They're laughing. They're enjoying themselves. Man, they're even crying. Are those happy tears? What's going on there? So
Bill's just loving what you're sharing. We got hearts flying across the Substack feed. Now, I agree. Businesses can learn so much, but we get all caught up with this shiny object syndrome or mindset that it sometimes upsets me that we don't pause and we don't take the time to really understand. We talk about being customer centric, we talk about being community based, and it seems like some days it's just lip service, and you kind of have to pause and just ground yourself and remind ourselves as to what are we building here. So if we're going to give back in the spirit of reciprocity, if we're going to give back to brands, businesses, what can we share with them today that you brought with you and continue to embrace from your culture? What can we share to help others remind themselves of what it's like to be part of a community and connect with our community? I know that's a loaded question. Do I still have you?
sorry, I don't know what was going on there, but I the the biggest lesson I think when it comes to Guam's approach, um, uh, I got to share with you. It may be a long story, but hang in there with me, and I'll get to the point. And it's really odd because there was a gentleman who actually started one of the early tourism boards here in Alabama, who was from Guam. And this was done in the 60s. In the midst of all that civil rights turmoil. 60s and 70s. He was able to create a tourism board here in Alabama. A short guy who was from Guam. And his name isn't Smith, it's not Brown, it's Pinko. That doesn't roll off even my tongue sometimes. So the fact that he was able to do that was immeasurable in the way of impact when he came back to Guam and started a tourism bureau, a visitors bureau there. And one of the very first things he implemented was this thing. Now, mind you, Japanese imperial forces during World War II invaded Guam and stayed on the island for 3 years and had concentration camps. When he returned, it was only 30 years after World War II had ended. And guess what segment of the world's population we went after? Because they were 3 hours by plane away from us. And we had treaties with them. Japan. So to come from that traumatic experience and then to welcome people to the island as visitors, whew, that was heavy. Sometimes a hard pill to swallow for some of the elders. But he said something that changed the course of history. One of the things he said was, obviously, the people who are coming more than likely didn't have anything to do with that. And the culture is different now. But on top of that, he reminded us of our culture with stories of who we are. And then he said, I want you, this is going to be our campaign. And it was a campaign that lasted years into my adulthood. And it was everybody show the wave. Simple. Everybody show the wave. And then he broke down the word wave into words. W, welcome. A, all. V, visitors. E, enthusiastically. Welcome all visitors enthusiastically. So that simple act of waving, backed up with the words, welcome all visitors enthusiastically, became ingrained even in the elders who experienced trauma during World War II. And so the Japanese industry, the tourism industry, we have a tiny little island, we have 1 million visitors plus annually. 1 million plus annually. And a majority of them come from Japan. And that was as a result of that. That little guy who impacted Alabama also impacted Guam and his culture and the history and the trajectory of the economy, but also of the success of the people.
So, Bill is suggesting, and this is great, and we can repurpose this story in this episode. This history should be taught widely. Whether it's this history or the history of any culture, that's one thing that as we get older, we regret not investing more time in. Listen, growing up, truth be told, wasn't really a history buff, didn't really care much for the history lessons and the grades that I would get. But today, just to sit and hear and listen about traditions and cultural history and enriching myself and surrounding myself with people who have a fascination, a passion for their roots and their story. This grows on you. over the years. You start to really appreciate life, and when you really start to appreciate the stories that our elders try to share in our youth. It's funny how those get compartmentalized and resurface throughout our life's journey. I want to thank you for sharing that with me and along with the listeners. That is some really deep stuff. So for those who are joining late or migrating from LinkedIn, we ran into some technical difficulties on LinkedIn, but we continue to stream live on Substack as well as YouTube. I'll make sure that the replay is embedded and find its way back to LinkedIn. But for now, just as a quick reminder, we are bringing two island boys together, one from the North Atlantic, the other from the West Pacific, and we're having a conversation and we're listening to stories from my friend Jay Pascua, and we're talking about Guam, the stories, the history of the Chamorros, and I am just humbled by your willingness to share. I know I touched on this earlier. We talked about doing this, and it's come to fruition, and I'm enjoying having this conversation. So thank you, my friend. We continue. If you have questions, comments, continue to drop them in the comments. I'm monitoring the comments in the YouTube feed as well as the Substack feed. Let's continue. Now, let's go back to more of you as a professional today. You help and you specialize in crafting impactful stories. Not just for yourself, but you help others. And you've written a book that helps people follow along with the steps that you've provided. How do storytelling traditions that you grew up with inspire your work? You pass it on through your book, but how do you pass it on? Let's talk about how this gets passed on in day to day, whether it's at work, whether it's anywhere. Let's chat about that.
Man. So really, I talk about, it's funny how LinkedIn isn't working at the moment for a restream, but I got into live events as a result of LinkedIn live events. And it started with Annie talking about, or his audience talking about trauma. And I know about that, right? I survived multiple Cat 5, Category 5 typhoons, hurricanes in the Caribbean, right? Storms, just big ones. So you have the cold air of Asia mixing with the warm air of South America. The volatility is crazy way out in the Western Pacific. And I saw many storms that way. Now, the infrastructure is decent enough where there's a lot of people are saved by just the fact that we live in concrete and cement buildings. Our houses, you can't get an insurance company to insure you if you do not have a cement built home. That's top to bottom, including the roof. And so I was talking about how different it is out here, and how in Alabama, it was crazy to me that buildings are built not to withstand tornadoes. Like, there's not even a code that says you have to. Really, there isn't that one that exists. And if you can find one, let me show it to me, because I don't see it. But anyway, storm shelters, it's not a requirement If you build a new house, you don't have to have a storm shelter. You don't have to have a basement. You don't have to, it's not a requirement. So I was talking about this. And I talked about resilience and how the stories that my ancestors and my elders passed down to me helped me through that time. And it helped people in their personal life, and some of them, and even in their business life, me sharing this story. We all experience, and this is something I share often, we all experience storms in our life. You may not experience the literal ones like I have, but you experience storms. And it's human nature for us to want to survive. But it's also human nature to thrive, right? And so if you share your stories, you could impact your community in such a way that it's positive and that they can take away a lesson from that adversity that you share. Now, one of the rules of engagement in storytelling that I share in my book, that rule is do not fear adversity. And what does that mean? Adversity is not an obstacle to great storytelling. It's actually the engine that drives it. Because human beings, we know struggle. It may not be the same, right? You're from an island. I'm from an island. We know island life, right? But the islands are different in certain ways. But here's a good case study. You and I, the more we talk about our stories, the more we find commonalities in our past, in our history, in our insights, in our experiences. But if we never shared our stories, we would have never made that authentic connection. Like attracts like. That word again, attract. Alignment.
Yeah, it is fascinating. I'll share a little story, kind of veer off lane here. I tell people I was born on a volcano. A lot of seismic activity to this day. It's what people have just become accustomed to. The ground moving, the ground shaking, hearing the rumbling, and it's been a few decades since a large earthquake where we're from. But that doesn't change people's willingness to just hunker down. Hey, we have a community here. Should things go south, should anything happen, the community comes together bigger, stronger, and more resilient. I took my daughter once on a trip back home, and now the volcano is a tourist attraction. It's dormant, but you get to walk in, you get to be inside, looking up from the inside. It is quite the experience, and the stories that kind of go hand in hand with living in that type of ecosystem. And go back to our elders, and they teach us how, Mother Nature and living off the land and living, you grow up respecting the larger powers that put destiny. Destiny isn't in our own hands; they're in the hands of the greater powers, and people respect that. Whether it call it religion, call it whatever you may want to call it or define it. The roots always come back, and the lessons are always learned through stories. And now I'm starting to lose sight of the point I was trying to make. But you're trying to get to the fact that what you've shared with us, Guam's history, your cultural appreciation and respect that you've kind of brought along your life's journey. The point I'm trying to make here is the similarities. And if it weren't for storytelling, if it wasn't for us focusing on our brand visibility, if it wasn't for us coming to the public airwaves and sharing, in some cases, our vulnerabilities, you realize through the stories that we hear from others how similar we are more than how different we are from one another. So,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah. So, I've said it several times in different venues. And one of the things is look at, again, use us as a case study, you and me, right? But me and Annie, he's on an island. He's on the British Isles. But, he has Nigerian ancestry. And yet I'm able to communicate and have a conversation with him. And now we've become good friends. We even were business partners to get this book going. He's my publisher. And none of that would have happened had I not just shared my story. And that, multiple times. And the more people hear your story, the more they're going to identify with you, align with what you're saying, realize that there's some commonality. And there's several ways that you can look at that people in general. You can listen to what they're saying, right, and absorb it, or you can ignore them and move on. But if the story is compelling enough, even if you're from a different culture, even if you're from a different part of the world, sometimes even if you don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, maybe that one story is the spark that connects you as human beings to move forward in something, on a project, on a show, on just being part of a network of other storytellers, other people who have similar interests. But it takes you actually sharing to be able to even create a network, right? You have to share the fact that, oh, hey, I like what you said the other day. It takes the fact that you have to share the fact that, hey, we don't have things in common, but you seem pretty interesting. I'd like to get to know you a little bit better. Right? But it starts with a story. You and I have worked in customer service, and I would tell you that a lot of the de-escalations that were phenomenal that I've gotten recognized for started with stories. I was able to de-escalate a lot of escalated calls from customers irate, cussing, telling us they're going to sue us. And at the end of that, they were laughing, sometimes even crying, apologizing profusely because I was able to put humanity into this conversation with a story. We all know love. We all know hate. We all know empathy, kindness, death, life. Because we're human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some people are monsters, you think, when they want what they want. But if they can connect with you in some level,
Now
it allows you to get further.
yeah, I totally agree. And that connection comes from, first and foremost, I'd say it comes from conversation. And storytelling is sometimes a one-way conversation, sometimes a two-way conversation. But if we use and lean into that customer service example, if someone feels like they're just another transaction and you're just going through the motions, that's when those escalations get out of control. But the minute you pause and just have a conversation, you talked about love, you talked about empathy, like when you bring emotion to the conversation and you bring human elements into that conversation, more times than not, you are going to defuse, de-escalate, and make progress with that irate or frustrated person on the other end. Now the question becomes, how do we keep that authenticity, that conversation, the story, whether through storytelling or just rather through human dialogue? How do we keep this alive while working with others? Because we have a tendency of forgetting so often. And sometimes it takes someone else to remind you, hey, let's pause here. Let's go back and remember what history has taught us, what our elders have taught us. What can we do today to remind those who are listening?
So really, it's a personal thing in that case, right? Your experience is different from mine. Right? Your upbringing, your childhood, it's different from mine. But you take your experiences, your unique experiences, right? And you use that in a way that shapes and impacts your community. You may not think of it that way right now in this moment, but that's what you do. At the core of every bit of communication between you and someone else, there's a story, right? And so if you just think of it in that way, every time you have a talk with someone, every time you text someone, anytime you send an email to someone, you're sharing a bit of your story. Some of us go into it a little bit more than others. But at the end of it, it's how you communicate with somebody. And so going back to ancestors, right? In order for them to traverse the Pacific, the entire Pacific, the largest body of water on this planet Earth, that's what my ancestors did, right? Not just explorers, they were all explorers, all of them. Everyone that had a canoe. They passed down information through stories, through chance. So it was survival that moved them to share these stories over generations. And so that, taking to today, right? Just understanding these things, that my ancestors surviving World War II, it allowed me to get through my trauma, my hardships, my experiences. And sharing that with others, right, allows me to connect with them. But you have to really look at it. So, brand building, right? In order to stick out in a sea of other vendors and other providers and other stores, your story is unique to you. Your story is going to get you to be seen out in the vast wilderness of the digital economy. And I always say, look at, if I said Tesla, who's the founder, you're going to tell me. If I said Apple, who's the founder, you're going to tell me. If I said Microsoft, who's the founder, you're going to tell me. Their stories are just a part of the product and the service as the product or service itself. I'm not saying be Nike. I'm not saying be Microsoft. Be you, but share your story in such a way that people will understand who you are and the products you bring and the service you bring to them. In business, it's called authority, right?
Right.
So
That's a great place for us to wrap things up. We are at the top of the hour. We had the opportunity to hear a little bit. We just scratched the surface on Jay, his roots, a little bit about Guam and the tropical vibe, the Chamorro roots. I want to thank those who joined us live, those who will enjoy this conversation on replay. We are taking a break because it is the end of the year. For many of us, there are year-end festivities, year-end holidays that we celebrate. So it's important for us to take a break, step away from the storytelling journey, and go share stories, go hear stories, and go create new stories. And we're going to come back in the new year refreshed, recharged, and looking forward to an entire new season lineup with fantastic guests who we enjoy sharing our stage with and allowing the opportunity for others to share their stories and their narratives with us. Jay, I can't thank you enough for being by my side throughout the year, being part of these conversations, helping curate and be part of my narrative, and being part of the conversations of the narratives that we've allowed others to share with us. I want to wish you and your family a great end to 2025, and I look forward to a prosperous and healthy 2026, where we will continue this voyage of visibility, storytelling, engagement, and most importantly, community building. Thank you.
Sainamasi, Sizuos Masi. That's basically saying thank you to everybody. It's been a great year. It's been great to be a part of the show and the conversation with you, Miracle. And I also want to thank you for putting up with me for, showing my island time too much sometimes. I have to come home from being in another time zone and then wind down and then jump on a live event. So I really appreciate your understanding. And hopefully the stories that we share here have impacted you in some sort of way, and that you can use this not only in your business but in your daily life. Stories are not, I always say this. I keep saying I always say this, but it's true. Stories aren't just knights in shining armor and unicorns and rainbows. It's you. It's who you are. I can't divest myself from storytelling because I'm the storyteller, and so are you. And whether you believe it or not, you communicate in the story. So share your stories with others.
So today's story and today's show will be repurposed through a blog, through an article, to meet our community members where they're at and giving them the choice, the option to consume today's conversation in the written format. We'll redistribute short clips to invite people to listen to the entire conversation. For now, I want to once again thank everyone who joined us throughout the year, joined us today, and have been part of our narrative. Have a great rest of your evening, your day, and a great rest of the year. We'll see you all again in the new year. Bye for now.